Segment 1. The Great Myth. Japan is cold and emotionless. The first thing people say to me when I tell them I am covering love and dating culture in Japan is, "But Julia, aren't Japanese people really reserved? Don't they avoid public displays of affection?" And yes, on the surface, that seems true. You are not going to walk down the Shibuya crossing and see couples making out the way you might in Paris or Buenos Aires. That kind of overt, theatrical affection is genuinely uncommon here. But here is what nobody tells you, and what took me several extended visits to Japan to fully understand. Japan does not suppress emotion, it channels it. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and missing that difference means you will completely misread every human interaction you have in this country. The Japanese concept that unlocks all of this is called tatemae and oni. Tatemae is your public face, the socially acceptable version of yourself that you present to the world. Hon is your true feelings, your real desires, the interior life that burns underneath the polished surface. Japanese culture does not eliminate hon. It simply keeps it protected. It is treated as something precious, something you do not throw around carelessly. You have to earn access to someone's hon. And when you do, it is absolutely extraordinary. I spoke with a woman named Yuki, a 32-year-old graphic designer in Osaka, who described her relationship this way. "My boyfriend and I never hold hands on the subway. That feels too exposed. But at home, he writes me letters. Physical letters, handwritten, every week. He has done it for 3 years." She pulled out a small wooden box from her bag to show me. It was filled with paper, folded carefully, some decorated with small drawings. That is not emotional distance. That is emotional depth of a kind that most cultures have completely abandoned. Segment 2. Where love actually happens. The geography of romance. To understand Japanese romance, you also have to understand where it happens, because the geography of intimacy in Japan is genuinely unique. And this is where things start to get really interesting. In most Western cities, public space is neutral territory. You might have a romantic dinner, a movie, a park walk. Japan has all of those things too, but it also has an infrastructure specifically designed around the idea that couples need curated privacy within public spaces. Enter the love hotel. Now, before you make assumptions, let me tell you what love hotels actually are, because the reality is so much more interesting than the reputation. Love hotels, or rabu hoteru in Japanese, are short-stay accommodation establishments found in virtually every major city and many smaller towns across Japan. They range from the completely practical and modest to the almost surreally elaborate. I stayed in one themed entirely around ancient Rome, with a marble effect jacuzzi, a ceiling fresco, and a menu of ambiance packages that included rose petals and a wine selection. Another I visited was themed like the inside of a spaceship. One had rooms that could be rented in rest periods of 2 to 3 hours, meaning couples who live with family or who share tiny apartments with paper-thin walls have a place that is entirely theirs for a few hours. The love hotel industry in Japan generates an estimated 400 billion yen annually. That is roughly $3 billion US, which tells you something essential. This is not a fringe phenomenon. This is a mainstream, deeply normalized part of Japanese romantic culture. And unlike the stigma these places might carry in some other countries, Japanese couples of all ages use them without a second thought. It is practical. It is pragmatic. And it is, in its own way, a culturally honest solution to a very real logistical problem, namely, that many Japanese people live with their parents well into adulthood, or in urban apartments the size of a large American closet. Beyond love hotels, Japan has another fascinating romantic geography, the couple's spot. These are scenic locations, mountain overlooks, harbor promenades, specific parks, certain shrines, that have been culturally designated as places where romantic behavior is expected and therefore, paradoxically, more comfortable. The Hakodate ropeway at night, where you look out over the twinkling lights of the city from above. The promenade at Odaiba, across the water from the illuminated Rainbow Bridge. Cape Tojinbo on the Sea of Japan, where the dramatic basalt cliffs meet the crashing waves. At these places, couples hold hands openly, lean into each other, take photographs together without any self-consciousness. The landscape gives them social permission that the crowded city sometimes does not. Segment 3. The Confession. Japan's most romantic ritual. I want to talk about something that has almost no direct equivalent in Western dating culture, and that I consider one of the most romantically brave things human beings do anywhere in the world. It is called kokuhaku, the confession. In Japan, you do not gradually drift into a relationship through a series of ambiguous hangouts while you both pretend you are just friends and nervously avoid the subject. No. At some point, one person, and it can be either the man or the woman, though traditionally it is more often the man, makes a formal, explicit declaration of their feelings. They say, essentially, "I like you. I want to be with you. Please go out with me." And then they wait for an answer. The answer is almost always given on the spot. There is no "let me think about it" period that stretches across weeks of ambiguity. The person being confessed to will say yes or no, usually quite directly. The confession either succeeds or it does not, and if it does not, both parties are expected to behave normally afterward, or at least to try. I spent an afternoon talking with university students in Kyoto about this practice, and what struck me was how seriously they took it. The confession is not something you do casually. A 20-year-old named Haruto told me. You think about it for months sometimes. You choose the right place, the right words. You have to be sure. His friend, a young woman named Saya, nodded. When a boy confesses to you properly, she said, even if you have to say no, you respect him for it. It takes real courage. And that is exactly right. The kokuhaku system, for all its formality, produces something that a lot of modern Western dating culture has completely fumbled. Clarity. You know where you stand. The ambiguity that drives so many people in other countries absolutely crazy. The "what are we?" conversation that gets delayed for months or years does not exist in the same way here. You are either together or you are not, and everyone knows which it is. Segment 4. Dating in the Age of Apps, and why Japan does it differently. Of course, Japan is not frozen in tradition. The country that gave the world bullet trains, robotics, and some of the most sophisticated consumer technology on Earth has also enthusiastically adopted digital dating, but in its own distinctly Japanese way. Dating apps are enormously popular here, but the dominant platforms are different from what you might know in the West. Pairs is currently one of the largest, with millions of users and a design philosophy that emphasizes long-term relationship building rather than quick swiping. It requires identity verification, which significantly reduces fake profiles and bad actors. There is a strong cultural expectation on these apps that you are looking for something serious. Another major platform, Omiai, a word that itself references a traditional Japanese matchmaking practice, is even more explicitly oriented toward people seeking marriage. This brings me to one of the most fascinating aspects of Japanese dating culture, the continued relevance and in some ways the revival of omiai as a practice. Traditional omiai was a formal matchmaking system where families would arrange meetings between potential partners, often with the explicit goal of marriage. The modern version, sometimes called konkatsu, marriage hunting, is less parent-driven but equally purposeful. There are dedicated konkatsu parties, konkatsu apps, konkatsu agencies staffed by professional matchmakers called nakodo, and even municipal government programs in rural areas specifically designed to help residents find partners, because depopulation is a genuine crisis in many parts of Japan, and local governments are trying everything they can think of to encourage family formation. What I find remarkable about this is not that it exists, but that young Japanese people engage with it without the embarrassment that the equivalent would provoke in, say, New York or London. Going to a matchmaker in most Western cities carries a certain stigma, the implication that you have failed at something. In Japan, using konkatsu services is increasingly seen as simply efficient. You know what you want, you are clear about your intentions, and you are pursuing it with practical determination. There is something almost admirably honest about that. Segment 5. The Japanese Boyfriend and the Salaryman Problem. Here is where things get a little complicated, and where I need to talk about one of the most significant fault lines in modern Japanese relationships: the salaryman and his relationship with time. The Japanese work culture, particularly in large corporations, has historically demanded a level of time and energy that leaves very little room for romantic life. The concept of karoshi, which translates literally as death from overwork, is a recognized social and medical phenomenon in Japan. And while government legislation in recent years has pushed back against the most extreme hours, the cultural expectations around work remain intense. Men in particular, though this is changing, have historically been expected to demonstrate loyalty to their company through sheer presence, staying late not always because the work requires it, but because leaving before your boss does is socially risky. I had dinner in Tokyo with a woman named Michiko, 44 years old, a project manager at a tech firm. She described her divorce with a kind of calm that told me she had processed it completely. "My ex-husband was a good man," she said, pouring sake with practiced ease. "But I saw him less than I saw my colleagues. We lived together and we were strangers." She paused. "Many of my friends have the same story." This dynamic has contributed to a phenomenon that Japanese sociologists have written extensively about: the growing number of Japanese people, particularly men, who have essentially withdrawn from romantic life entirely. They are called herbivore men, soshokukei danshi, a term that emerged in the mid-2000s to describe young men who are gentle, passive, and largely uninterested in pursuing sexual or romantic relationships in the traditional assertive masculine mode. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 40 and 60% of single Japanese men in their 20s identify with or are associated with this concept, though the definition is genuinely loose and contested. And then there is the broader phenomenon of hikikomori, social withdrawal, which affects a segment of the population that has retreated from social life almost entirely, often living as shut-ins with minimal outside contact. The government estimated in 2019 that over 1 million Japanese people were in a state of hikikomori. Now, I want to be careful here not to paint a portrait of doom, because that would be both inaccurate and unfair to the millions of Japanese people having perfectly fulfilling romantic and family lives. But understanding these pressures helps you understand why Japanese dating culture looks the way it does, why the efficiency of konkatsu appeals, why clarity about intentions is valued, and why the question of work-life balance is at the center of almost every conversation about love and partnership in contemporary Japan. Segment 6: Love in Small Places, the culture of affection you actually see. Let me bring this back to the street level, because I do not want to leave you with statistics when there is so much warmth and beauty to describe. Here is what public affection actually looks like in Japan, because it is not absent. It just speaks a different language. You see it in the way a couple will walk in perfect synchrony without touching, so attuned to each other's rhythm that their bodies communicate without contact. You see it in the elaborate gift-giving rituals. On Valentine's Day in Japan, women give chocolate to men. Not just any chocolate, but handcrafted, meticulously prepared honmei choco, meaning true feeling chocolate, which can take hours or even days to make. Then on White Day, a month later, men reciprocate. The exchange is a calendar ritual of expressed sentiment, and people take it with absolute seriousness. You see Japanese affection in the phenomenon of matching outfits, couple look, where partners wear coordinated clothing as a public signal of their togetherness. Matching sneakers, matching scarves, subtle tonal harmonies in an outfit that tells the observant eye, "We chose this together." It is so common that entire sections of clothing stores in Harajuku are dedicated to it. You see it in the onsen experience, the traditional hot spring baths that are such a fundamental part of Japanese culture. Couples travel to onsen ryokan, traditional inns, for romantic weekends with a ritual that centers around shared bathing, rest, and extraordinarily good food. The entire experience is engineered around slowness and presence, two things that the harried urban life of Tokyo rarely provides. Watching couples at a ryokan, the gentle way they pour tea for each other, the quiet conversations over kaiseki dinner, is one of the most intimate things I have witnessed in any country. You see it in the park on weekends, families and couples spread on picnic blankets under trees. You see it in the arcades of Akihabara, where couples play crane games together, competing to win stuffed animals for each other with the completely unironic delight of people who have given themselves permission to be silly. You see it in the way people talk about their partners, with a specific, carefully chosen vocabulary of terms that signal the nature and seriousness of the relationship with precision that English does not have. Segment 7. What Japan teaches the world about love. I have covered dating and relationship culture in more than 30 countries now, and every single one has taught me something. Brazil taught me that passion should be performed boldly, and the body is something to celebrate. Scandinavia taught me that equality in partnership is not idealism, but logistics. It is what actually makes relationships work. India taught me that love and family are not competing values but intertwined ones, and that the village that helps raise a child also helps sustain a marriage. And Japan has taught me several things that I think about constantly. The first is the value of intentionality. Everything in Japanese romantic culture, from the kokuhaku confession to the handwritten letters to the matching outfits to the carefully chosen honmei choko, is deliberate. It is chosen. It is not love performed by accident or habit. Japanese romantic culture asks you to mean it, every time. The second is that privacy and intimacy are not opposites. We live in a culture right now that increasingly conflates visibility with value. If you did not post it, did it happen? Japan says, the most important things happen when no one is watching, and that is exactly what makes them important. The fact that a couple does not hold hands on the subway does not mean they are not deeply, quietly, fiercely in love. Sometimes the most intimate moments are the ones you keep. The third thing Japan has taught me is about endurance. Japanese culture has a concept called gammon, patient endurance, persevering through difficulty without complaint. It is sometimes critiqued as a cultural tendency toward suppression, and in extreme forms, that critique has validity. But in relationships, there is something to be said for the idea that love is not just an emotion, but a practice, a daily choice to stay and build, even through the seasons of distance and difficulty and exhaustion that every long relationship inevitably contains. I met an elderly couple at a temple in Nara. He was 81, she was 78. They had been married for 53 years. I asked them, through a translator, what the secret was. He thought for a very long time. Then he said, "We decided every morning to be kind." She added, "And we always ate breakfast together. That is it. That is the whole secret. And you do not need to be Japanese to understand that." Segment 8. The younger generation and the changing landscape. But Japan is not static, and any honest account of love and dating here has to acknowledge that the country is in the middle of a significant cultural shift, driven largely by its youngest adults. The generation of Japanese people who are in their early 20s now grew up with the internet, with global media, with Korean pop culture and American streaming platforms, and a far more porous sense of what Japanese values mean in a globalized world. Many of them are pushing back against the expectations of their parents' and grandparents' generations with a clarity and confidence that is genuinely exciting. Young women in Japan today are increasingly vocal about rejecting the model of the devoted, self-effacing wife who subordinates her career and personality to the household. The word sengyo shufu, full-time housewife, carries connotations for many young Japanese women today that it did not carry for their mothers. Women are outpacing men in university attendance and increasingly in professional ambitions, and their expectations for what a romantic partner should look like have shifted correspondingly. They want emotional availability. They want shared domestic labor. They want someone who comes home at a reasonable hour. Young men are navigating this shift with varying degrees of grace, but the conversation is happening. And there are signs that it is producing change. The government's work reform legislation, pushed in part by demographic desperation, has genuinely reduced mandatory overtime in some sectors. A growing number of companies now offer and even encourage paternity leave. More young fathers are taking it. Slowly, glacially, critics would say, but it is moving. I also want to mention the LGBTQ landscape, which is undergoing one of the most significant transformations in Japanese history right now. While Japan does not yet have national same-sex marriage legislation, a growing number of municipalities and prefectures issue partnership certificates that provide limited legal recognition to same-sex couples. Tokyo's Rainbow Pride Parade is now one of the largest in Asia. Public opinion surveys show that a majority of Japanese people and an overwhelming majority of younger Japanese people support marriage equality. The legal change feels, to many observers, not like an if, but a when. The Tokyo neighborhood of Shinjuku Nichomi, sometimes called Nichome for short, is the historic heart of Japan's LGBTQ community, a dense cluster of bars and spaces that has been a gathering point for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Japanese people since at least the 1950s. Walking through it today, you see a community that is simultaneously ancient and urgently contemporary. People who carry the weight of decades of careful, coded survival alongside the energy of a generation that is finally, loudly refusing to hide. Segment 9. A Day in Romantic Japan, What You Would Actually Experience. Let me paint you a picture of what a day of observing love in Japan actually looks like, because I want this to feel real and not theoretical. You wake up early and take the first train, which is already packed. Around you, couples stand together in the crush of bodies, not holding hands, not kissing, but occasionally you see a man steady his partner as the train sways, one hand briefly at the small of her back, then gone. That touch, there and then not there, says everything. You walk through Yanaka, one of Tokyo's old Shitamachi neighborhoods, where the streets are narrow and the shops are run by people who have been there for decades. At a small bakery, you watch an old man buy exactly 2 cream puffs, one for him, one for whoever is waiting at home, and he asks the baker to tie the box with extra ribbon because it is a gift. The baker obliges without comment, ties the bow with precise, practiced care, a transaction so small and so tender it almost breaks your heart. You stop at Yoyogi Park in the afternoon, where the cherry blossoms are starting to bud, and several dozen picnic groups have spread across the grass. The park is full of couples in their couple-look outfits, families with children running in every direction, friend groups who have draped themselves across blankets with canned coffee and convenience store onigiri. On the path, 2 women walk arm in arm, and in Japan, female friendship includes a physical closeness that is not necessarily romantic, so you are not always sure what you are seeing, which is somehow its own kind of beauty. In the evening, you go to Shimokitazawa, the neighborhood of secondhand bookshops and indie music venues and coffee roasters with hand-lettered signs, and you notice how many people are on first dates here. You can tell because of the slightly heightened attentiveness, the careful listening, the way they lean fractionally forward, the way they laugh a half second after each other, still learning the other person's rhythm. First dates in Shimokitazawa have a particular quality of hopeful concentration, like people doing something they know is important. You end the night at a standing ramen bar where a couple beside you are eating in complete silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the specific, warm silence of 2 people who have been together long enough that words are optional. They finish at the same time, without coordinating, and split the bill without discussing who owes what. Then they walk out together into the night, and you watch them go until you cannot see them anymore. That is love in Japan. That is the real life of it. What I keep coming back to every time I leave this country and start missing it immediately is this. Japan has built an entire civilization around the idea that the most important things deserve care and attention and precision. The tea ceremony, the art of wrapping a gift, the way a ramen broth is developed over 36 hours, the handwritten letter in the wooden box. Love in Japan is not louder or quieter than love anywhere else. It is just more carefully made. And in a world that moves faster every year, where everything is instant and disposable and swiped away, there is something in that slowness and that care that feels, to me, like a kind of quiet revolution. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If this made you want to book a flight to Tokyo, honestly, Do it. Subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one.